Hello everyone, so in this video I want to automate together with you a process about generating invoices, and the idea behind it is that we have 10 rows about our customers. So we have invoice number, purchase order number, date when the purchase was made and to whom it was billed, and we also have detailed explanation of what was ordered. So for each purchase order we have several line items, its units and unit cost. And what we want to do is provide all this data into invoice generator, generate an invoice out of it, and merge later on all those invoices together. And I want to show you how to do this process in UiPath. So the first step we are going to do in our automation is get customer data from the Robocorp website. So this website is very useful for development and testing purposes, because you can define a schema like I did, and it will generate you random data for it. So my schema is invoice number, PO number, date, and bill to, and here we can see the preview of data, and we can retrieve this data using HTTP request towards the link that is generated here. So let me copy it, and let's go back to UiPath and create a new sequence. Let's call it main, and inside let's place one more sequence and call it get sales data, or get actually customer data. So now if we want to do HTTP request, we need to add additional package, which is called Web API. Let's select it and click install and save. So now we can use the action named HTTP request to send a GET request towards the link that I copied. Let's click OK. And let's also store the output of our request. And let's name it Robocorp response. However, the response that we are going to get is going to be a simple string. We want to deserialize it. So let's type JSON, deserialize JSON array, and the input is going to be Robocorp response, and the output, let's call it JSON array customer data. Let's now debug and see what we have. Okay, so I'm going to click step into. And what we have here is a JSON array with all the data that we retrieved from Robocorp. So once we have customer data, we can also read our sales data from an Excel file. So the data that we have here is actually in detail data about every purchase order. So for example, for a client with purchase order 1003, we have those two line items that we want to input into invoice generator. So first thing that we need to do is actually read this data, and for that let's use Excel application scope. Okay, and let's place it outside this sequence and provide the path to it. Okay, and let's also use the read range activity to read the data from it. And the worksheet is called sales data. Okay, and let's store it into data table sales data. Let's create a new sequence and place it inside. And let's call it read sales data. So for each purchase order that we receive from Robocorp, we would need to filter our data from Excel based on the purchase order that we receive. So it's going to be our next step. Let's place a sequence, and inside it, let's place for each activity. So for each purchase order in our JSON array customer data, we are going to filter the sales data. So let's use filter activity, filter data table. And the data table that we are filtering is DT sales data. And we will filter it by column purchase order. Okay, so let's place its name here. And it should be equal basically to the column that we have in our schema. So the column is named PO number. So let's go back to UiPath, and to access this column, we refer to our current purchase order, in brackets put PO number, and type to string. So once the data is filtered, we can actually start entering it into our invoice generator. So let's take a look at it. So first of all, we are going to enter the header data. So everything that we received from Mokaru. And then in line items details, we are going to enter the data from our filtered data table. So let's start by first opening this website. And we are going to open browser before we iterate through our rows. So open browser, and let's indicate the website that we just copied. And let's also select browser type to Chrome. Okay, so in here we are going to actually attach ourselves to this browser to not open it every time. Okay, let's indicate browser. And inside of it, we can start entering our data. So first of all, let's place an activity type into. And let's use UI Explorer to indicate the fields. So the first field we are going to indicate is from whom is this invoice. And we're just going to type here company XYZ. So let's select the placeholder so it would be identified easily and click Save. Okay, so now we can here provide company XYZ. And let's right away select simulate type and empty field. So the next field is going to be bill to. Let's select UI Explorer. Okay, and now we can indicate a new element. And let's also select a placeholder here to identify our element. And here we actually need to provide already data which is dynamic. So we are going to refer to our current purchase order and to its property bill to. So current purchase order and in brackets bill to dot to string. And let's also select simulate type and empty field. So now let's repeat the same steps for other elements as well. So we are selecting open in UI Explorer, and now we are going to select our invoice number. So indicate element, invoice number, and in here let's delete this CSS selector and leave the tab index and click Save. And we here also need to provide the same structure. So current PO bill to, however, it's called invoice number. Okay, so we need to replace bill to with invoice number. Let's place another type into. Okay, and we're going to select now due date. Okay, let's click indicate element, due date. And let's also change the selector a bit, like this, click Save. And we need to provide current PO, date, dot to string. Okay, one more. We need to now enter purchase order number. going to place it in here. And let's see how it looks like in UI Explorer. And let's replace it a little bit like this and click Save. So here we need to provide the column which is called simply purchase number, like this. So now we have all the data for our header and we can start entering data for our line items. However, here we need to remember that one purchase order can have several line items. So we need to enter all of them. So once we click another line item, a new row appears. So we need to find some dynamic selector which would allow us to enter line items in any row. So let's go back here. And what we would need to do is iterate through our filtered data, so DT filtered sales data, and enter one by one those rows. So let's place another sequence below it. And let's name it enter sales data. So here we would need to use for each row in data table activity. And our data table is called DT filtered sales data, and let's keep it at current row. So for each row in Excel, we would need to do basically the same. We would need to type into some data. And let's use for that also our UI Explorer. And basically we need to find some index which would allow us to assign the selector dynamically. So let's try out right away with the second row, if maybe there is some index that we could use. So let's select the placeholder, unselect those selectors, and we here see index equal to. So it means that probably the first row would be index 1. Let's check it. Like that, and let's see what element it highlights. So as we can see, this index would allow us to dynamically select the elements. So let's click Save. And in here what we would need to provide is based on the way how columns are named in our Excel file. And the first column is named item. So we refer to our current row. In brackets we need to write item and dot to string. And we need to repeat the same steps for another two fields. So let's use once again our UI Explorer and indicate the element quantity. So indicate element quantity, and here we can also select the placeholder, delete those two, and we here see once again index 1. So this time the column is called units, so let's copy the previous string, however replace item with units. Okay, and one more type into, and here let's click open in UI Explorer and select the field named rate. Okay, so in here we can leave the parent class and the index appears, so it's good. However, here instead of item we need to write unit cost. So what we also need to remember is that actually the index 1 works only for the first line, so we need to make it dynamic. For that we can create an iterator, and it would be equal to 1 every time we start going through the filtered data. So let's select assign activity, place it in here, and let's create an iterator. Int iterator. Okay, let's change it to data type to integer. And assign it a value 1. And every time we are going to iterate through one row, we will actually increase the number of the iterator. And in that way, we could replace our index with the value which this iterator has at the moment. So let's go to our selector. Okay, in here, in the selector field, we would need to replace 1 with the value of the iterator. Okay, like that. Dot to string. Okay, another plus sign and double quote. And we can copy that part and replace it everywhere in other selectors as well. Okay. Okay, let's select next, type into, go to the properties, and instead of 1 we will just paste that, and here as well. So instead of 1 we paste our iterator, and in that way we iterate through all rows. What also we need to remember is to click another line item button every time when we go to the second, third and so on row. So basically we need to place an if activity, and whenever our iterator is larger than 1, so int iterator is larger than 1, it means then we need to click line item button before we can enter new items. So let's select click and indicate our button. So in that way, we would be able to enter all sales data. Let's collapse it and think what we should do next. Next, we actually should download our data, so download our invoice. For that, we would need to click on download invoice and proceed. However, let me first write whatever in the required fields and now select the action click. So what we click on first is our download invoice button. So once we click on download invoice, another window would appear and we would need to click on PDF recommended. Okay, so once we click on that, we will see a save window and we would need to provide a path to our file. So for that we would use type into activity. Okay, so the robot would paste here the file path to which it should save the file, and then it would need to click once again on save button. Okay, and once the file is saved, we would actually need to go back and create a new invoice. So the button new invoice also needs to be clicked. So let's select one more click activity and indicate the new invoice button. So the path to which we would like to save our invoices looks like that. And then we need to come up with a unique name for each invoice. So for that, we could actually use invoice number. So let's copy it from here, because invoice number is going to be unique. So we can place it as our dynamic variable and then .pdf. So in that way, all the files will be saved with a unique name. So now let's make sure that we have everywhere simulate click. Okay, and here as well. And for enter sales data, we want to put also simulate click and simulate type. Okay, in here we have empty field plus simulate type. Like that. And let's also take a look at our header data. Here we also want to use simulate type and empty field everywhere. Okay, here we already have it. And the last step, after we save all invoices, we would like to merge them together in one invoice. And for that, we would need to add another package. So let's type PDF. Okay, and let's go to official. Then here we have UiPath PDF activities, and we can install it. So let's now collapse all our activities. And at the very end, we want to add a merge PDF activity. join PDF files. So the input of it is going to be a path to the folder. So let's take a look where we save all our files. Okay, at the very end, when we type here, we have a path to our folder. So let's copy it and go back to join PDF files. So the file list we can get by typing directory dot get files, and here we need to provide the path to the folder which is called invoices, like that. And at the end we want to output our file, so let's paste the path once again. However, we are going to call it merged invoices.pdf, and we can click OK. So in that way, at the very end of the process, we are going to also merge all our files. So now it's time to run our process. I'm going to speed it up the recording a bit, and at the end we're gonna check all the files. So now the robot has finished processing, and let's take a look at the files that we saved. So let's take a look at this invoice. And here we have all the line items. We have also due date, PO number, and invoice number, to whom it should be billed, what is the company it's billed from. And let's also take a look at the merged invoices. And here we have 10 pages, so all 10 invoices were merged together into one big PDF file. And basically the robot finished processing correctly. So in that way you can automate such process in UiPath.